We've come to the end of an amazing year, a difficult one, but an interesting one. And usually at this time of year, at Christmas, we reflect on a number of things. We think about how the year's gone. We think about where we're going for the new one. And most importantly of all, we just stop and think about Jesus. Not just us, but most of the world stops at Christmas time to think about that baby, that manger, that promise. I've called our conversation today So Many Stories because there are so many stories, and that the older we get, the more stories we have. When I think back to Christmases past, church was quite different on Christmas. I'm not even sure it was mentioned. Gifts, they were a lot fewer, a lot smaller, a lot less expensive. Food was much the same, and family gatherings were the focus. That's how it was in my family anyway. Yours might have been quite similar. And I've got other Christmas stories I could tell you but won't, like Christmas Day at the beach and having lunch at the hospital because both my parents were working, and then back to the beach. Or Christmas Day in a tent somewhere west of Wallsend. We took a day off because it was Christmas and we went back to work the next day in the fields. Or the first Christmas we spend with our children, or even the last that we spent with their grandparents. And then there are so many literary stories that we can reflect on at Christmas. Henry Lawson, I love his characters because I've got great empathy for them. I knew a lot of people growing up like Henry Lawson's characters. In fact, many of them were my own family. Let me just share this little bit with you. But to sneer at old-time customs would be nothing but a crime, for the memory of the past is all bound up in Christmas time. And then, our hearts were filled with kindness and forgiveness sublime, for no one knows where one may be next Merry Christmas time. Bit of a theme with Lawson, no one knows. Or that quintessential Christmas story, Charles Dickens, The Carol. And this little quote, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless. Good night." And for those more widely read, this from O. Henry and his Gift of the Magi. I quite like it. $80 a week or $1 million a year, what's the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. And we can think about that and come up with some different answers. Putting all those stories to one side, at Christmas we focus on the nativity story. We've got the Magi from afar, seeking, travelling, believing. We've got the shepherds not so far away, stories of revelation and celebration. And I was reading recently where it's quite possible that those shepherds would take the perfect lamb, the one marked for sacrifice, and wrap it up in cloth and put it in a safe place like a manger. If that's true, I wonder what they felt when they came into that cave and saw Mary and her baby. And then, mentioning Mary, there's the teenage mother, yet to be married, but here with the beautiful baby. And there's the busyness of the town all around. I guess we've all been to the mall ourselves trying to do some Christmas shopping. Try getting a glass of water, let alone a bed for the night. That was the story of Bethlehem the night Jesus arrived. And then we've got the refugee family, escaping what the world had created for Jesus and looking for a place of safety and freedom. For me, if I had to choose a Christmas song, it would be the one Lennon and Ono, and you know the words as well as I do, and it comes in sort of like a double theme. So happy Christmas for black and for white, for yellow and red ones, let's stop all the fight. And then behind that, war is over if you want it, war is over now. Today we're going to have a quick look at Matthew's retelling of the Christmas story and more, and and just remembering that his friend John said, look, if we wrote down all the stories that we've experienced with Jesus and all the things that he told us and the things that he taught us, there wouldn't be enough room in the world for all the books that would be generated. So we'll just look at one of those books, the Gospel of Matthew. It's built with 5 building blocks. And each block is a story and a teaching. Story and a teaching. And this happens 5 times. In fact, those 5 building blocks create a chiasm that's worth looking at, because the geography of Matthew and the way Jesus tells his story is also interesting. Starts on the mountain, and you might reflect what stories these are. On the mountain, down to the town, to the seaside, back to the town, and then finally another mountain. Matthew 13 is the epicenter of that chiasm. And if understanding it has any importance, then looking at Matthew 13 will be important for us. Matthew 13 has 7 stories, 7 teachings, and they're all about the kingdom. They're all about heaven. And in the Jewish tradition, Matthew doesn't mention God very often, but instead he puts heaven, or he puts the kingdom. And we know on reflection that he's talking about God. 3 of these stories are about farming. I remember once I was in a 200-acre paddock on a tractor, and we had to do some ploughing, and it took all day, getting ever decreasing circles, just going round and round. In the stillness of the western sun, dust just sitting in the air, falling around you as you drove into your own little dust bowl. Interesting times. But that's not what the stories are about, because they're about us more than they're about farming, and they're about God even more than they're about us. We'll take the first story today. We call it the parable of the sower. And we can think about the track or the way or the road, which is hard and unreceptive, trampled down, or the rocky way where the seed's sort of interested, it starts growing, but then things dry up, sun gets too hot, not so interested anymore. Or where the thistles are growing and there's distraction, change of focus, and things die out. It's important to me to understand that the sower does not avoid these areas where he should have anticipated little response. The seed does land on the track. It is scattered amongst the thistles. It is there in the rocky ground. Every time the sower goes by, seed is scattered there. And we this morning can imagine why that's true, because we are that soil. We're the ones that do the shape shifting. We're the ones that make changes. We're the ones that grow. We're the ones that come to a realisation and acknowledgement. And grace, for me, is that sower who keeps on going, keeps spreading the seed, keeps returning, keeps scattering until we, that is our hearts, are receptive to him. What might that change be? It could be circumstance, it could be opportunity, it might simply be maturity. But it means, when we reflect on it, that we, like God, should neither give up nor judge other people until the end. As the sower spread the word, so we too can spread the word. The seed never runs out. I remember my first sermon in that little church west of Bullamacanka, and Bill, well, we wore stubbies and t-shirts, but Bill was the old farmer. He wore work boots and an overall and a hat that he'd had for 40 or 50 years, and he basically said, if you're going to stay here and work in the paddock, if you're going to spend your time getting covered in dust, then you're going to also preach a sermon one Sabbath. And so I did. It was my first sermon, and I talked about the promise of Jesus. That brings me to Jesus' first sermon. And his theme then was the theme for the whole of his gospel experience, and it could have been a theme for his last. This is the text he used. How beautiful the feet of those on the mountain who declare the good news of victory, of peace, and of liberation. For Jesus, those three things summed up his ministry. We call that gospel, and it's far, far more important than any doctrine that we might want to talk about. Gospel is about victory. Gospel is always about peace. And you can't have gospel without liberation and without freedom. And that's the point of the first Christmas story. That's the point of any celebration that we might, with our families, plan for this week. God becomes a human in Jesus. That's the essence of the story. We could ask how. I can't explain that. We could ask why. The why is answered very simply. The nativity story is an explanation of God's love for each of us. And so, it's the same with our stories at Christmas. Christmas equals great joy. Just as the gospel is freedom, liberation, and peace, Christmas is joy. It all fits together. Jesus' life begins with God showing his great love for us. It wasn't long before it would end with the same thing, God showing his great love for us. God's ultimate gift, that is the Christmas theme, the Christ child. A gift to the world, a gift to humanity, all those broad generalisations, but most importantly, a gift to each and every one of us. A gift to us whether we think, oh look, we're that hard ground, that it's not really going to have much effect on me, just going to be trampled away. Or we might think that we're really growing up surrounded by thistles, and what chance is there of the word surviving in our lives? Or we might think, look, the road is rocky, there's not a lot of soil here, doesn't hold water very well. I know things can spring up and I'll enjoy it for a season, but it will pass. The point is that God is not concerned with our past. God is more concerned with who we are. God's ultimate gift, that's the Christmas story, the Christ child. And we find the very centre of understanding the nativity story and the gospel story and Christ's life in the centre of that chiasm, Matthew chapter 13. Because there we can see that God is the sower. He is not looking at what you are, he's looking at what you can be. Because each of us in the end, we are the fertile soil. Grace reminds us that our God, our Saviour, the sower, never ever gives up. Not once, not ever. And that is Christmas. God is pursuing you, is seeking you out, and we can respond. Be blessed.